So next, I'm delighted to introduce to you Chris Golden. I did a little digging around Chris and found out that he became interested in ecology and Madagascar at the tender age of 9 when he did a school report on the ring-tailed lemur. And then in 2014, he put all that to practice and he became one of the 14 National Geographic Emerging Explorers, which sounds hugely exciting. He hasn't looked back. He's now a research scientist at Harvard PHAM School of Public Health and Associate Director of the Planetary Health Alliance. And he is going to talk to us about his work on the relationship between the fish trade and human health. So thank you, Chris.
Well, I guess I'm following suit with my presentation because it, too, is on co-benefits and tasty dinners. My presentation is on the fall in fish catch and how that threatens human health. This is really the context for which our research program began. Across the globe, climate change, unsustainable fishing practices, pollution are all driving massive declines in fisheries around the world. And what that means is that in the face of this, we really wanted to understand what the human health impacts were of these rapid and massive declines in fish catch. We put together a really interdisciplinary team of scientists from a variety of universities, NGOs, government agencies, etc., to really try to tackle these questions. Our program is called Thetis, which is the Greek goddess of the sea, where we track health and ecosystem transformation in the seas. And we really have an enormous debt of gratitude to the Wellcome Trust for funding this venture. A very basic schemata of how we are looking at this research was to merge existing mega databases that connected fisheries catch data to economic trade data to nutritional data so that we could model the impacts of fish declines on human nutrition. So we're really going from declining fish catch, how people are forced into some forms of alternative foods, how this then leads into forms of dietary change, predisposing certain subpopulations to nutritional vulnerability, and then what the human response is. Does it involve technological innovation with things like aquaculture and mariculture? Does it lead us to have increasing improvements in fisheries management or marine conservation? What are those next steps to then change this cycle? So to focus on declining fish catch, we've been collaborating and heavily reliant on folks at the University of British Columbia, including Dirk Zeller, Vicky Lam, and William Chung, where they have launched the Sea Around Us project, which was a 15-year research program to reconstruct fish catch in every nation, in every coastal nation around the world. So this database really facilitated our ability to understand trajectories in fish catch and what that looked like in different parts of the globe. What you see here visualized is the change in maximum fish catch potential that is driven by sea temperature. So William and Vicky have led this relatively complicated bioeconomic model, which I will not go into today, that highlights how changes in sea temperature specifically will lead to fish populations migrating poleward away from the tropical equatorial belt into temperate regions, increasing fish catch in some areas while reducing fish catch in more vulnerable areas. And this again goes back to what we've been talking about this morning on issues of equity and intergenerational justice. As a public health specialist, when I look at this map, and if you erase the title, I see a map of food insecurity, where we would be most concerned about malnutrition and micronutrient insufficiencies. This is really perfectly overlaid with where we're anticipating the most rapid declines in fish catch. So it's really this perfect storm of declining fish, increasing temperatures, inability to kind of adapt to climate change, and an increasing risk of malnutrition. So what do people move to when they lose access to fish? The kind of basic answer to that is that it doesn't really matter. Fish is nature's superfood. This is borrowed from World Fish, where they call it nature's superfood. And one of the things that our group is really trying to say is that the reason why fish and other animal source foods are important really has little to do with protein. It's really these micronutrients that they deliver. It's the vitamin A, the vitamin B12, the iron, the zinc, etc., that are very uniquely positioned within certain types of animal source foods to provide nutrition to people who don't have access to vitamins, supplements, fortified foods, biofortified foods. So by necessity, when people are losing access to their traditional diets and they're faced with infectious disease and they don't have infrastructure within their food systems to fortify or biofortify them, they will be moving toward nutritionally inferior foods. And so what types of dietary changes are then anticipated from this decline in fish catch? There's really three different types of typologies, and this is, of course, very roughly and broadly categorized. There will be the unaffected wealthy nations, which are places like the U.S., Japan, Korea, etc., where a local collapse of their fisheries might have some small impact on the market. There might be a slight price shift, but really the people who were already eating fish will continue to eat fish, and the people who weren't eating fish will continue not to eat fish. There's then a second category, which is places where we would anticipate increasing undernutrition, increasing insufficiencies in micronutrients. These will be places like Madagascar or Suriname or these other places where a local collapse of the fishery will not be solved by any market mechanism. They'll move into more rice, more tubers, more vegetables, etc. And then finally, there's this interesting category of nations which will experience an acceleration of the nutrition transition, whereby you will lose access to the traditional diet and they'll move more into fast food, into highly processed foods, into foods that might have import subsidies. So these are places like Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, small island developing states in the Pacific. And so then those different categories predispose certain places to increasing nutritional vulnerability in the face of massive fish declines. And so what we produced was this very broad visualization to overlay areas in the deep blue and lighter blue where you have these rapid fish declines, and then projected this on top of areas where we would anticipate having the highest reliance on fish for nutrition, and also we're at this kind of threshold for nutritional insufficiency. So that if they were losing access to fish, they would potentially then flip over into an area of deficiency. We estimated that roughly 750 million people worldwide would become micronutrient deficient in things like iron and zinc, and that roughly 1 billion people were vulnerable to vitamin B12 and fatty acid deficiencies following a decline in fish. And so where do we go from here? As Joy Guillemot mentioned this morning, the World Health Organization has estimated that around 1/4 of the global burden of disease could be avoided with proper ecosystem management. Could that be the case with fisheries? I personally think that it could be. It's a really hopeful example of where we could go into the future. Many people think that aquaculture is really the silver bullet for this area, and so we wanted to try to actually interrogate that and inspect that question. And in a paper that we've just had recently accepted, we really show that aquaculture is insufficient to address these issues. You can categorize countries into three basic types. These are the 41 nutritionally vulnerable nations to fish declines. In the dark red, there's little to no production of aquaculture, and so therefore they're not going to be benefiting from aquaculture because the market is not going to draw those aquaculture products into their nations. The second category in yellow is countries where there's enormous amounts of aquaculture production, but it is export-oriented. And so the only way that they would benefit from aquaculture is if the trickle-down economics will then kind of filter into pro-poor purchases or pro-nutrition purchases. And then finally, the green areas are where aquaculture is possible to benefit nutrition. This is where countries are having enormous amounts of aquaculture production, and it's actually retained in domestic markets. There's still problems where it might go to wealthy cities or urban elites and things like that, but we've also shown that when looking at this, it's very often not showing this kind of major nutritional benefit. That in one area in Bangladesh, this was really shown where there was concrete evidence of aquaculture actually benefiting local people. And so what we would need is really a reorientation to have people be benefiting from nutrition. Unfortunately, I don't think I have a way to actually make this slide run. What you see here would be actually all of these lights blinking and showing you where all of the commercial vessels are for fishing. And then in that red area, which is in Kiribati in the South Pacific, you would see all of those lights moving to the edge of the boundary after the gazetting of the Marine National Park. And this is really to show you that our theory of change is that if you can actually rehabilitate the fishery, if you can increase productivity and increase access to fish, conservation can actually serve as a nutritional delivery mechanism. You can actually rehabilitate the fishery and have that benefit local people in this really meaningful way, and that's where we're hoping that this goes. And so what you see here is that our hopeful kind of schemata is that we have some form of pro-nutrition and nutrition-sensitive aquaculture paired with improvements in fisheries management to increase and stabilize fish catch that then leads to strengthening resilient food systems with positive dietary changes that lead to nutritional security. And so that ultimately is the end game, and I'm very hopeful that we can get there with very thoughtful research and policy translation. And with that, I just want to say thank you to everyone.
Thank you, and it's really wonderful to hear, I think, work that's looking at about the oceans and the sort of fish in the oceans, because often I think when food is discussed, often it's discussed in the context of land and land use, and actually we don't talk about the oceans enough.